So who wants to talk about Bobby International? What is the issue in Bobby International?
And the case of Bobby Art International deals with the movie Bandit Queen, and
Mhm.
the petitioner had said that the movie shows a nudity, and also the petitioner who belonged to the Gujar community, he said that the movie shows a rape scene where a man uh, who was a Gujar, he was raping Phulan Devi. So he said that it amounts to demeaning the entire community in front of the society. So he
Mhm.
said that the A certificate that the censor board had granted to the movie must be withdrawn, and the High Court had did that, and it came as a appeal to the Supreme Court.
Mhm. Anybody else? What did the Supreme Court say?
Ma'am, there were
Yes, Ayushi.
Ma'am, actually, there were three instances on which the petitioner has actually objected. The first scene was actually when she was humiliated and she was stripped naked in front of, I think there was 100 people out there, and she was paraded and made to draw water from the well. So that was the first scene. And the second scene was in which she was getting raped by that Babu Gujjar. And even there was a the third issue was that the use of swear words and slang words in the movie. So to the first scene, the court actually Supreme Court, the court said that you have to scene. For example, if a movie is made and that movie is made on a social evil, that means you have to show that social evil in the movie. Otherwise, what's the point of that movie? So they're not actually showing you the obscenity or vulgarity. Also, there's a difference between obscenity and vulgarity. Vulgarity is something which if you're watching something vulgar, so it's the feeling of disgust. It's not something that you are arousing the feelings of someone. That is in the case of obscenity. So that's the difference between the two words. So they're actually saying that when you're seeing the how she has been humiliated by those people, she's stripped naked and paraded, so in that way you're actually seeing how they have tortured her. You are not actually uh, obscenity is not there. The reason why those scenes are important in the movie is that actually that nudity shows the sadism and the heartlessness of those people. That's what the court said. And secondly, for that rape scene also, that the posterior was shown in the movie of the rapist. So that is not because they want to show the posteriors. That is that the complete action was there, that it focused on the trauma, the emotional turmoil, and the negative side of, they're not arousing your feelings, they're actually showing you how bad it can be. I mean,
Mhm.
the trauma which is there, the mental and the physical pain which is there on the victim.
Mhm. What are the issues, because the whole conversation we are having is under the heading of morality and uh, what is the title we have here? The section is sexuality and morality. So the whole conversation here, when the objections are coming to these scenes, what is the basic basis on which they are saying, or they should be deleted, or they should not be permitted? It will corrupt the youth. It is obscene. So, what constitutes obscenity is the issue. Whether showing frontal nudity of the woman when she's paraded in actual life in front of the 100 men out there, when this is shown in the movie, does it amount to obscenity? So, what is our sense? And that's what the Supreme Court was saying, and you rightly pointed that out. That when that scene is shown, the purpose of that scene or the impact of that scene is not to create lust. It is not to corrupt people. It is to create awareness of the oppression, the extent of oppression. So merely because there is frontal nudity shown, this automatically does not become obscenity. So what is obscene And we have this other legend which says indecent representation of women. So whether there is difference between the two, what is indecent is also obscene or not, whether obscenity is different from indecency. So when we have all these advertisements where a woman is standing near the new brand of motorcycle, or when women are shown as the part of the deal, you get a motorcycle, you get a woman because you have a motorcycle. Are these indecent? Are these obscene? Or these are just advertisements? How do we define indecent? Commoditification of women's body, is that indecent? What is indecent? And what is obscene are the basic questions that we are asking ourselves. What are the values? What are the perspectives which um, which would help us in determining whether something is obscene, whether something is indecent? So, what do you think when all these advertisements which show women doing the household work, are these indecent? Can you think of any example which is indecent and is not obscene? Whether obscene has to be seen only in terms of bodily nudity, or this is also obscene to present women as commodities. Are we expanding the concepts of obscenity and decency, or we are going to determine it by reference to the moral values in which bare body of the woman is indecent, bare body of the man is not indecent, frontal nudity of course not permitted to any. So by that norm alone can we decide this whole question of what constitutes indecency. So the lesson we learn from this case is that judges are saying, see what is the impact of the scene. I remember a joke, which was that there was a man who was going to see a film. I forget now whether it was what the film's name. There was a scene in the film where a woman is beginning to take bath. So she's taking her clothes off. And as she's removing her clothes, a train comes in and obstructs the sight. There was a man who was going again and again seeing the film. So one day, I don't know, you've seen it already 20 times, why are you still going? He says, well, maybe someday the train will be late. So that's his perception of his wanting to see the nude woman, not realizing, of course, that the film already shot. But this perception that whether merely because there's a nude body, does it automatically mean it is going to, look at the definition of obscenity. Anyone who has a access to legislation, IPC, how is obscenity defined? Just find out, take out the provision 290 something, I forget now what is the section number.
Ma'am, section 292 defines obscenity,
Mm-hmm.
and no, 294 punishes obscene acts or words in a public place. It
But
says it.
it's a definition first.
I
What is
must
292?
I must look for it.
Section 294 punishes '92. 292 says a book, pamphlet, paper, writing, drawing, painting, representation, figure, or any other object shall be deemed to be obscene if it is lascivious or appeals to the prurient interest, or if its effect is such as to tend to deprave and corrupt person. That is the section which was said to have been attracted in this case. So, from where, no, how would anybody say that this section is attractive unless you start saying that showing the female body in any circumstance will lead to the men having these lascivious feelings or reactions. So, what are we now again saying? Again, no, the person who challenged the film scenes is coming from the approach of saying men would found men's lascivious instincts will be will rise if they see this scene. So it is only coming from a very naive understanding of even the male sexuality. It is assuming that men are not even able to see the reprehensible behavior even in a film like this. So I think that the judge has done a very good job of that, saying that you have to look at in determining obscenity, look at what is the impact it is expected to be by the filmmaker, and also what will be the impact. Whether seeing this scene, will anybody feel aroused by that nudity scene when it is so much of oppression being shown there, so much of violence being shown there against the woman? So the whole purpose of the film was not to what the section said to saying it is lascivious or appeals to the prudent interest or its effects is such as to tend to deprave or corrupt person. So whether such a scene, the scene that we're talking about, will it deprave or corrupt persons, or will it chastise them to really introspect and find out what's gone wrong? Why so much oppression against women? Whether there is an issue of oppression in this film. So certainly from that angle, we think that it's a good analysis of, but we do confuse. So coming back to the second examples, I'm saying that when you look at this definition, we should need to look at the indecent also. How is indecent defined? Definitions. Indecent, this is section 2C. Indecent representation of women means depiction in any manner of the figure of a woman, her form or body, or any part thereof, in such a way as to have the effect of being indecent, or derogatory, or denigrating women, or is likely to deprave, corrupt, or injure the public morality or morals. The definition here is much wider than the definition of obscenity there. Part of that, part of the definition of obscenity is also taken. But when you apply these tests of indecent representation, the effect of being indecent, how do you define women, or derogatory or denigrating women? So which of the advertisements will fall in this category? Denigrating women. All the women. Why? Whether it is okay. So the question I'm again reformulating: whether showing women as the person to look after all the household work, is it denigrating? Is it not denigrating? We'll say no, 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 no. They are being utilized. Oh, this is what they do, and this is glamorized. So whether the definitions given here in the indecent representation of women, any manner of the figure of a woman, her form or body, or any part thereof, in such a way as to have the effect of being indecent. So when we have, especially in the categories of bikes, we find a lot of commodification of women. So woman's body will then turn into a bike. So he is as much enamored with the bike as he has been with the woman. So somewhere this whole equalizing the woman with the bike is one toy, a woman is another toy, one is inanimate, other is a human being, but equalizing and presenting that whether so but despite this definition being there, how come all these advertisements keep on happening, keep on repeating themselves? So you make a law specifically focusing on this aspect, but the manner you interpret will again go to obscenity and not indecency. Indecency is saying, oh, if you're not wearing proper clothes, you're indecently dressed. Your cleavage is showing. You're indecent. You are what cursive. This is indecent. This is how we tell our women in the families. You are not decently dressed. Your shirt is too short. But when we show the same woman, look at the what is this airline? The one which wears red,
Kingfisher
Kingfisher. Means I
and
was
Virgin.
so aghast seeing the dresses of the women. The air hostesses, poor things, were constantly pulling down their skirts because they were so short. That's not indecent. That's trend. That's kind of branding. So somewhere uh, we will come to this other area also, that why women, no, why no, how do we those air hostesses? Why should they dress up like that? Why cannot they have full trousers on the airline when they have to serve food, do anything? Why they have to have such short skirts? And that is not seen as indecent. For whose purpose? For whose command? No, they are being. Who is the consumer of their dresses in the plane? Not women. So for the pleasure of the men's eye, to attract more men on your airlines, you can use women air hostesses, and that's not indecent. So somewhere this whole objectification of women's body is writ large, despite these laws being there. Everything is seen from the perspective of morality. Women should be dressed up like that, they should remain in the homes, etc. So if their body is used even in an oppressive situation, that's also considered indecent. But when her body is used for the pleasure of men in posh scenarios, it is not indecent nor obscene. I find this is obscene. This is indecent. So merely because you get a law, it doesn't really help anything. For me, the small point is that, and the law is interpreted by reference to the morality. The whole area of sexual offences has been writ large with that. The whole manner in which we have interpreted submission, the whole values system we have, the whole value we have put on virginity, on fidelity, on purity of women, all for women. Whether it's obscenity, whether it's rape, it's sexual assault, it is indecent. The parameters are not women's individual persona. It is how they will be perceived, how they will be, how. So women are responsible if when men become lascivious or they are, only women can corrupt men. Women are seen as the ones who are corrupting the society. Women's bodies are for corrupting the society, constantly reinforcing that aspect. So I think that's something which we need to become aware of, that we have these two laws and nothing actually changes. So let's look at that law to say what happens if something has been indecently presented. Prohibition of advertisements containing indecent representation of women. Section 3. No person shall publish or cause to be published or arrange or take part in the publication of exhibition of any advertisement which contains indecent representation of women in any form. Again, we're stuck here. So what will constitute as indecent? So if we have a Rakhi Sawant poster with all her body bulging out and she's in a sexy pose, but so this is indecent. But if the same thing is done in an advertisement, this is okay. Poonam Pandey has been another figure on the verge of controversy on being indecent or not being indecent, or being obscene or not being obscene. So if Salman Khan takes off his clothes, this is macho. If a woman takes off her clothes, oh, obscene. So we're very double standards there, and they're not understood that human body has its inherent um, modesty. All the issues of modesty are considered to be the problem of the woman. Men have got no modesty. They're not supposed to have any modesty. We have this section, power to enter and search, penalty. Any person, section 6, any person who contravenes the provisions of section 3 or 4 shall be punishable on first conviction with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 2 years, and with fine which may extend to 2000 rupees, and in the event of a second or subsequent conviction with imprisonment for a term of not less than 6 months, but which may extend to 5 years, and also with a fine not less than 10,000 rupees, which may extend to 1 lakh rupees. Offences by companies. Then we have offences to be cognizable and bailable. So I would want you to actually check out. This legislation is of the year 1986. I would want you to check out. It's a cognizable offense, okay? And what does that mean? Police can take cognizance of the offense on its own. Nobody needs to make a complaint. Arrest can happen without warrant. Please check crime in India and let me know in our next class how many arrests have happened. I'm not even asking you convictions. How many arrests have been made? Any process have been initiated under this legislation for section 3 and section 4 offenses. So it's cognizable and bailable. So the combination, our general understanding is, if it is cognizable, means it's a serious offense. The serious offense, it should be non-bailable, but it is cognizable but bailable. So even if somebody does it, straight away entitlement to bail. When you start looking at the scheme of the legislations in terms of implementation, that's when you catch up. So you will have all these big words, then you will have the processes which will ensure that nobody actually ever gets caught, or if caught, can get away with anything. So we have all the offenses against women of sexual nature, or when we say when their body is being used, etc., bailable category. So if a sexual assault, bailable. So even if it is cognizable, it still is made bailable. And we were saying this, that the general scheme is that if it is considered to be a petty offense, then less punishment, it's non-cognizable and it's bailable. And as the gravity increases, you will keep on having more. So in this one, the first for the offense under third, it's only up to 2 years or rupees 2,000 for the first offense. So it's or, it is not and. So even the scheme of the punishment is also saying, don't send these poor men to prison. Give them the opportunity to be out on bail. They can still get out of this whole system by paying penalty up to 2,000 rupees. For the second and subsequent offense, they are higher. So therefore, the scheme of the legislation also tells us how serious is this offense considered. What is the impact of this action? When so again there is this controversial category. So women voluntarily are wanting to be part of those advertisements. They're not objecting. They're making money out of those advertisements. So should we give them the freedom to choose the profession they want and what they want to do? We're back to Sunny Leone. If a woman chooses to be a porn artist or she wants it to be used as, she doesn't bother about commodification of the human body. She's getting money out of it. So how do we then say, by creating this obstacle, they say, you can't use that body. Are we taking away the freedom of the woman to be part of those advertisements? Why is it that we have this legislation in the first place, indecent representation of women? The opening statement says an act to prohibit indecent representation of women through advertisement or in publications, writings, paintings, figures, or in any other manner, and for matters connected herewith or incidental thereto. So certainly the obscenity law was not found to be sufficient, and therefore we got another one, which is certainly expanding the scope of that what are the circumstances. So at one level, we are saying the rationale for the obscenity law was that it will deprave the minds of the men, and therefore you will punish. Who will be punished in those cases? It's the women or the agents who are using her body to produce those things. Whether women will be punished for obscenity, no, she will not be punished. Only those who are depicting her. It says 292 book, pamphlet, paper, writing, drawing, painting, representation, figure, or any other object shall be deemed to be lascivious. Punishment. What does the punishment part says? Ankit, you had that section 294.
Yes, ma'am.
Please read that.
Section 294 says obscene acts and songs. Whoever to the annoyance of others A. does any obscene act in any public place, or B. sings, recites, or utters any obscene song, ballad, or words in or near any public place shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 3 months, or with fine, or with both.
Yeah, so look at the obscenity law, it's a gender neutral law. So even if a man takes off his clothes in public, he's also part of obscenity. But using the male body in advertisements is not part of indecency. So only women can be represented indecently, men can't be represented indecently. So either there is a there is a categorization of what is decent for men, what is indecent for men. We do not know. Everything is only decent, or there is not a problem as to what how they are presented. Why is that not a problem? Because they are not presented in a problematic manner. So somewhere these legislations are indicating that we have made the woman body as the object for the consumption of men. So whether it is in terms of obscenity or whether it is otherwise. The third thing, as also in obscenity law, we have found the obscenity law being used by couples showing affection in public, even if they're holding hands. And this is done a lot more. There are two men and two women are holding hands. Showing affection. Sorry, I got a little bit of cough since yesterday. Certainly, somewhere we are constantly noticing that men are Milind Soman. Yeah, that's a good example. So, again, we have a controversy there whether Milind Soman running in the nude, which is not showing any private parts of Milind, it's just the beautiful body of Milind, the Soman, Milind, whatever surname. So, whether that's obscene or not. So some are saying the show off was that no, at the age of 50, look at his body, how supple and in good form he is. And there's nothing which is so whether just a nude body without showing any private parts, whether that's obscene. And we know that the moralists in our society are raising questions about that. And certainly those questions are raised more often in the context of the female body than they are raised in case of the male body. So that's kind of one of the discussions we have to have that when we are talking about morality and sexuality. How are we viewing the two bodies? How are we viewing the actions, sexual actions by the two bodies? And certainly today we're talking about the third body as well. the conglomerate of the third, which are the whole range. What is obscene? When the hijra comes to our house and threatens to take their clothes off in order to get more money, there's a bargain happening and all that. Is that obscene? Has any complaints been ever lodged against that action? So when you start looking at the actual implementation of these laws, we know there's a whole moral baggage about sexuality and morality playing a part in case of women's involvement in these actions. Males' involvement in the same action are not seen. So in case of the second rape scene, it is not seen that it is obscene to show the men's procedure in that fashion. It's saying that, and it is not about this man, it's saying the whole community has been defamed. So the action, the focus is not on what this man was doing, while the focus was on the woman in the first scene. Some are saying also shifting that oppressing the whole, one woman is not seen as oppression of the whole class of women in that group, but showing this one man is projected as reflecting the whole community he belongs to. So the moralist analysis or moralist reaction to the law is based on values which are not based on equality or equal treatment or equal perception about the human body. These are very, very gendered perceptions. When you look at Shani Ahuja's case, what is this case about? Who was Shiny? Who is Shiny Ahuja?
Former Bollywood actor.
Bollywood actor. What was he charged with?
He uh he has raped his like maid.
Hmm. And what did his wife do?
She said, "I stand with my husband."
And today also she stands with her husband. So that's again going back to what we were talking about earlier. So then now what does Shiny Ahuja do when he gets convicted or charged? He comes to the court and now challenges the very law of adultery. So what he was doing was adultery, but not as per the law at one level. The other second part is the rape law. Now, what have the judges done in Shani Ahuja? What were the options? What were the arguments in Shani Ahuja? What were the different positions taken by? So, what was the objection to the adultery law was? One of the objections was that this is discriminatory, that it allows the husband to prosecute the other man who has had sex with his wife. One group of people were demanding that the woman should be given the same rights. She should also be able to prosecute the other woman who is having sex with her husband. The second choice was to say neither he will be able to have a criminal action nor she. She never had, but now the husband will not have. What's our sense? Is it right to say adultery should not be, as is the case today, should not be a criminal offense? Should both the husband and wife be given right to prosecute? Or whether the law as it existed was fine? What's your sense?
Option two, ma'am.
I'm sorry, what is the option two?
Both the parties should have right to prosecute each other, because in the most of the case it is the man who is indulged in adultery. So
So, what is the argument to say it should be decriminalized? That's what the
because
judges have done. Why?
maybe I'm wrong, ma'am, but because earlier position of the woman was like only like the husband has right to prosecute the other man. So they said, "Ki, okay, fine. Now we are providing equality. So neither he will be like prosecuted now, neither woman. But
Mhm.
that will not
No, but
help."
if we did the other way around, we said no, both the husband, either the husband or the wife can prosecute the other. Whoever is adulterous, you can prosecute. If we made that law, do you think it will change anything on the ground?
Not that much, ma'am, but at least we will have a like something. The woman, in the most of the case, women not like willingly take any action. They upset, but later on they get convinced by their husband. "Ki, okay, fine, I'm forgiving you." But there will be like a small group of women who actually want to do something. So
Okay.
we are
What does the adulterous relationship indicate to the marriage? Does it mean it was just a you know it was just a not one time incident? Was it just momentary lapse on the part of the partner? Whether it was an intentional category, what does it mean for the marriage? Does it mean the marriage is over? And by punishing, can you save that marriage? What will be the purpose served if you criminalize? Even in the law, this is existed. Did it save the marriage? The husband, the wife is adulterous, and the husband prosecutes the paramour. Does it save the marriage? Does it restore the sanctity of marriage? If the partners themselves forgive each other, they understand and they want to move on, that's not an issue, no? But if this is an indication that the marriage has fallen apart, then by punishing, what purpose are you serving? Whether to the husband or to the wife, what purpose? And remember, this was categorized under the category of offenses against marriage. So, will the marriage be saved if you punish the offender? So, discrimination was one part of it. That this was discriminatory, that it allowed only the men to prosecute the paramour. Secondly, it indicated that women were considered as not having an agency to decide voluntarily their sexual activities. They were seen as incapable of having the intention to commit adultery. But that's the intention to commit the offense is the requirement mens rea. So the law assumed that women are not capable of. The wives cannot be. They're only seduced, they're misguided by the other man. So if she's an accomplice and you do not punish her, then we're taking away her agency. That was the second argument against this. So if you allow the wife also to have the same right, so husband had two options. He could do both the things. He could prosecute the man as well as divorce his wife. The wife, on the other hand, could divorce him but not prosecute the other woman. So by prosecuting the other woman or the man, what is the purpose that you're serving?
I'm thinking, ma'am.
Yeah, that's good. Everybody has to think and find out because our instinct, a lot of people felt that now it will mean that everybody can be adulterous by non-criminalizing, by decriminalizing the offense. Because now it is free for all. Because no criminal action can happen. That was the major objection to decriminalization. So really, does it mean that if there is no punishment, then people will go and committing that offense? That's why the demand was that no. Now everybody can have adulterous relationships. So why should people not have adulterous relationship? Morality question again. Na? The whole aspect about punishing people is saying you are being immoral and I'll punish you for that. It's got nothing to do with marriage. Because marriage is broken down. If the parties are not ready to live together, What other purpose accepting, upholding a so-called morality that you should not be having sex outside marriage? This whole question of illegitimacy of children has come from the morality of sex outside marriage, sex without marriage. So the only legitimate sphere of sexual activity is seen as a heterosexual marriage. If it is not happening within the heterosexual marriage, then it has to be criminalized. Then it has to be no protection to be given. You have to put stigmas on people. All that is coming from the moral value of the Victorian perception, which said sex in marriage in heterosexual unions. So any sex outside that category of heterosexual sex within marriage was criminalized. So it's not coming from any rationale, excepting the morality part of it. And the fact that we were punishing that, it was adding to the patriarchal concept, a patriarchal value within the morality also. So if the offense was against marriage, then wife should have got the equal right from the very beginning itself. The fact that we did not give it to the woman, we gave it to the man, was showing the patriarchal nature and monopoly over the sexual body of the body of the woman itself on the man. So very patriarchal in nature, very, very moralistic in nature, and has nothing to do with saving the marriage. It was just to saving the morality, a moral value which said heterosexual sex within marriage. But heterosexual sex within marriage also limited to women, not to the man. So any other man entering your marital union to be punished, but this man in the marriage can go and have sex, and there's no morality involved. There is nothing wrong about it. Going back to the construction of sexuality, male sexuality, because men cannot control. They will not be satisfied with just one woman. So if they go on having sex with other people, it's bad, and therefore woman can take a divorce if she's unhappy. Divorce is a mutual choice category. No? If she wants to, doesn't want to, she can still live with the adulterous husband. A lot of women do live with the husband having another affair after outside the marriage. But if the woman does that, then not acceptable at all. Somewhere there were double standards being used to judge the sexual conduct of men and women in the marriage scenario. The sexuality, male sexuality, is irrepressible, uncontrollable, insatiable. Therefore, men going out of the marriage and having sex with other women will bring no criminal action against them. But if a woman does that, okay, no criminal action will happen against her also. But the third party involved will be punished. Third party involved in case of husband is not to be touched at all. So somewhere we were again legitimizing sex with multiple partners by men, married men. But sex with multiple partners by women was seen as immoral. So somewhere the whole legislation which is looking at sexual activities among human beings, whether it's 377, 375, and 494, all these sections are indicative, are reinforcing the values we are talking about, that what has been considered moral, the male sexual activities are all seen as part of their nature. It is not immoral, it is not unnatural. It is normal for them to do so, but women should be sticking to one man. And sex only within marriage. Their sexuality is not unsatiable, uncontrollable, it's not any of those. So therefore she can contain herself and she should contain herself, and that's what is right for her. So there were very clearly double standards in which we viewed and we penalize or not penalize sexual activities by human beings. Sometimes in gendered manner, sometimes in a non-gendered manner also. But most of these are on the gender category. So in my article I also written that the only legitimate sphere for sexual activity was seen to be heterosexual marriage. So going back to one of the sections, I don't know whether I had a time earlier to do that or not. So if a woman is, I think I did that in the last class. If a woman has sex with someone believing her to be husband, she's protected. If she has sex with a boyfriend believing him to be another person, she's not protected. So again, in the name of marriage, if you're not believing that you're married, then you are acting very not rightly, morally. But if you are being sexual, if you are loose moral character, you do it at your own peril. Law will not come to protect you. People can defraud you if you're modern enough to have sex without marriage, then you are capable enough to look after the consequences also. So very categorically you find these hidden agendas, hidden values, not agendas, hidden values and perceptions about what is right, what is wrong, and reinforced by law again and again.
Ma'am, just a clarification. So,
Mhm.
the reason for why the husband could not prosecute the wife under the adultery law was that because the wife had no agency and she could not seduce another man. She could only be seduced by him. Was
No,
that the reason?
we do not have a written answer to this. So we need to find out in the scheme of the IPC who are the people who are absolved from criminal liability for their actions. One is immaturity of mind by reference to age. The other is insanity. The third one is intoxication when you have been forcibly intoxicated and you have become insane to the same level of cognizability, your cognitive faculty has been affected. So what is about this woman? Where does the fall? Why is she not liable for acts she does voluntarily? Is there any other circumstance in which a person commits an offense and he or she is not liable? So if having sex outside marriage is an offense, why is she not? If she does not consent, her consent has been freely obtained or it has been obtained by fraud, the offense is rape. Then a different section is attracted. But the moment you are attracting 494, we are saying she was a willing party. So if she is not insane, she is not a child, she is not intoxicated, what other reason for her? No, she has to fall in, no, she has to be considered into one of these three conditions for her to be seen that no, she is not an accomplice. Well, she's an active partner. So an active partner, then it's an offense of rape.
And the maybe the only possible reason could be that just like a child cannot think what is good or bad for him or her, just same is with the wife that she could not think if this is good or bad for her.
That's what we're
Meaning
saying. Na?
she has no
She
ability to
doesn't have
think.
developed mind. Her
Mhm.
mind is like a child who does not know what is right and wrong for the child. So the woman also does not know it is wrong or what is right and wrong for her to have sex outside marriage. So we are equating her her mental agency as that of an immature child below the age of 7.
No, but then we say after 16 she can give consent to sexual acts.
That's with double standards. With the double standards. So as a wife, she suddenly loses her mind. As an unmarried woman, she has the full capacity. But the moment she becomes a wife, she loses her mental capacities. It's so the moment you start examining what is happening underneath, you say that how ridiculous, and we've been living with these laws forever, never questioning them. So how many double standards? The same woman, as long as she is not married, she has got full capacity from the age of 16. The moment she marries, even at the age of 15, now of course with POXO it is 18, but if you do not have POXO, then from the age of 15, she loses her capacity to say no to her husband. And if she says yes to anybody else, she still doesn't have the capability to say no or yes. She does not know what she's doing. Is she insane? Is she intoxicated? Is she immature like a child? One of the three categories have to fit in. So these are only three circumstances in which a person under criminal law is not held liable for their actions. So if having sex outside marriage is punishable for this other man, why not for this woman? Why not for the man? So there are all these questions were there. And yes,
Sorry,
Ayushka.
Ayushka. Yes, ma'am. Could one of the reason also be that women have traditionally being looked at as property of men, and so that is why when we are prosecuting other men for having sexual relationship with the wife,
Mhm.
that is in a way protecting rights of the man who's married to that woman.
That's certainly true. That was the starting point. So to that extent, though, it's very clear that the wife was the sexual property of the husband,
Hmm.
and this other man is transgressing on that property.
Hmm.
So that is the rationale for punishing the man.
Yes.
Now, what about this woman?
Hmm.
So the woman can also be divorced still, but she cannot be criminally prosecuted. Whether the act was done only by that man, or that this woman was not an active partner in doing the act for which you are punishing this man. So if two persons commit an offense together, both of them are liable, na? You can't say one man will be liable, the other man will not be liable.
Yes.
But in this case, we are saying one of them will be liable, the other will not be liable. So what is the rationale? So first part is true. The rationale for punishing the other man was that this other man is transgressing over my property, my wife.
Hmm.
So the wife did not have sexual monopoly over her husband. So
Yes.
the husband goes and have sex with somebody else. This woman cannot say, "Oh, you are transgressing on my sexual property, my husband."
Hmm. Yes.
So the sexual property was only the woman. The woman did not have sexual monopoly over the husband's sexuality. So husband could go and have sex with anybody. She has got no criminal remedy. So there are two angles to the two angles to it. One is that what is the liability of the husband when he transgresses the boundaries of fidelity in marriage. The only limitation was that if the wife is not happy, she can go for a divorce. The husband living in adultery, the spouse living in adultery is a ground. And I think now it is not living in adultery, so although even one action can lead to that, if I'm correct. So that is civil remedy. And which is okay, which I think is fine. Because certainly once you say that we are committed to each other, and we recently attended a wedding in in our family, and one of the promises the husband makes is that I will not have any relationship with any other woman for the rest of my life of a sexual nature. That's the promise he gives, and wife is assumed to be giving that promise. No, because they're supposed to be in any case as a starting point that they should be virgins. So then the only, and that's where they said, she should not be of a loose moral character, which means that she should not be sexually active before marriage. So she is seen to be as virgin. We never ask the question whether the man is virgin at the time of marriage or not. So the man's sexuality, his sexual conduct before marriage is not a concern in marriages. And that's where this whole problem arises that a woman has been raped and she's no more a virgin, and marriage also becomes an issue apart from being apavitra. So all these values put on the loss of virginity, even if it is a non-voluntary, is on woman. For the man voluntarily losing virginity, forcefully no, forced to lose virginity are not a concern of law. So forceful sodomization of man is a concern, but morality is not involved in there. It is immoral for this man now has become impure because he has been sodomized. It's not that men do not suffer trauma, but they do not suffer the social stigma attached with in addition to the trauma. In case of women, she suffers a trauma, a violation of herself, as well as social ostracization. She will be thrown out of the school. Her neighbors will shun her. They will not allow their daughters to meet with the girl. Lot of outing happened, a lot of ousting happened for the woman if she is sexually violated. Nothing of that happens to the man, even though the individual trauma is perhaps the same. But her trauma is lot more because, in addition to the physical trauma, she has to deal with all these societal pressures as well. So, given all the scenario, when we look at the offense of adultery, we do realize that gender was written large on it. It was not even a gender neutral category. It was a very gendered category and based on complete patriarchal value of monopoly of men over their wives. So that has been challenged in and set aside on Janya Hamza. So I thought, no, the point that, why should it not be criminalized is an important question to ask. Why both of them should not have been made punishable. So in that we need to ask that what is it that you're trying to achieve by punishing both of them, by imposing criminal liability? The whole question of what act to be made as criminal wrong, what act to be made as a civil wrong. Adultery continues to be a civil wrong. You have a civil remedy in terms of divorce. So the other choice is that is this offense against the married partner is of a such a nature that it is going to um, destroy the whole social fabric of society? Will it impact the whole society? And the people who were asking for criminalization were saying so. And they were saying, oh, now it is free for all. Anybody can have sex with anybody else. So, what is wrong about it? You are not upholding the sanctity of marriage. So, if the partner is unhappy about it, she has a remedy or he has a remedy. And you had never said this whole thing that now not having made the man criminally responsible for his transgression has not been an issue till now. The same freedom, quote unquote freedom, which was available to the men, now has been extended to women also. It's not that everybody will now rush and have sex outside marriage. But if they have it, they will have the same consequences. But the morality said, no, 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 women can't be doing, they can't be sexually promiscuous. Men, it is normal for them to be so sexually promiscuous. So the construction of sexuality again had been reflected in the manner in which we had created the definition of adultery. So shall we stop? Yes, Saloni?
Ma'am, I have one thing to say. We are legalizing the live-in relationship, becoming very modern. We are also decriminalizing the adultery from criminal offenses. But what about the product of this relationship, the children? They are still called as illegitimate. They don't have any kind of right. So that making me very.
One point, Saloni, we have not legitimized living relationships for purposes other than domestic violence. So that's still not recognized. They do not get rights against each other. Their status does not change. Their inheritance rights do not change. So nothing changes excepting that if the woman in the living relationship is subjected to domestic violence, that will be, and this living relationship also should be in the nature of marriage. And we have case law to say what constitutes in the nature of marriage. So if there is a married man or there's a married woman in a living relationship with somebody else, even she is not entitled to protection against this abusive person, partner. So a very limited category. So the children, for us, the child rights people have always been that even without the living relationships, why a woman who has been raped and a child is born to her, what is the fault of the child for the child to be known as illegitimate child? The child has done nothing. There should be no difference whatsoever to children born within or outside marriage. And lots of countries do that. They do not distinguish. But because we are still bound with this whole thing that any procreation, any sexual activity should happen only within marriage, therefore we even stigmatize the children also, take away their rights to inheritance of property, not to the immediate parent, but in ancestral property. So all that is punishing children for something they have not done. It's completely unjust, completely undesirable. It's not in the best interest of the child, and today's principle is that all decisions should be taken in the best interest of the child. There's no reason for this to be done, but law has still not taken the leap which is required.
Ma'am, what we could do as a law student on this topic?
As and when you become lawyer, cases like that come in, ask, raise the alternate voices. Look at the law critically, demand all these cases which have brought in changes. How have those changes come in? Because some lawyer raised the voices of the unheard, raised the voice from the other side. So in this education that you are having, you have chances to look at the law again afresh as a lawyer, as a judge. If you have the sensitivity, you have the awareness, if you have the eyes and the angles from which to examine the law critically. You can make that change when you have the power. Certainly, you can have conversations with your families, your friends, but to assume that I will have conversation, everybody enlightened, doesn't happen. The prejudices are so ingrained in our upbringing that it takes a long time, continuous exposure, conversations, to start rethinking. I'm having a very tough time with the first year. We have not gone through the whole rigmarole that you people have gone. So you can imagine, pick up the conversation we are having. But first year is having a much more difficult time to kind of comprehend the discrimination of law, discriminatory nature of the law, because they have not gone it step by step. I'm kind of exposing them in our discussions on the defenses, where President doing defenses and murder. And as we go along, we just read the article today, Catherine Donovan's article. So they're kind of still resisting quite a lot. I'm quite sure that the seeds are being sown, so they'll start looking at it. Some of them are picking up. I think in your class, you're more now attuned to understanding the hidden biases in the law.
Right, ma'am.
Yeah, and these are not, this is not the law created with the specific intention and awareness to oppress women. These have come because that is the way society had been organized. That is the way we have thought the law should be, without realizing that how oppressive it becomes, how exclusionary it becomes for women, how standards are not equally applicable to both of them. The moment you start looking critically, you will find new ways to interpret the law and say, oh, no. And I'm quite sure you'll find judges who will be able to see the things as you present it to them. So, okay, we stop for today. Please mark your attendance if you haven't done so already. And tomorrow, what are we doing?
Joseph sign case, ma'am.
Yeah, Shiny Ahuja we've done today, no? Sexuality, Joseph, Shiny, we've done. So we'll be looking at economic empowerment. So brush up whatever you know about labor laws, and we will be focusing on this one specific legislation, and generally speaking about what are the economic opportunities available to women, what are the obstacles in that, and how the private-public dichotomy, the distinction, the division of labor impacts on their labor opportunities. So that's the angle we will look at tomorrow. So please brush up your labor laws. Whatever labor laws you have studied so far, get a sense of and think on gender perspective, that are they gendered? The gender neutral laws and labor laws. There is certainly some equal pay for equal work, etc. Those laws are there. We just focused on the discrimination which happens in the area. But we'll look into more aspects about economic empowerment to work. Okay, let's stop recording.